close to the microphone, Tracy.
Okay. All right. A little nerve-wracking, right? Being up here. First, thank you to everyone who's already shared and spoken tonight. I really appreciate you. This is not an easy thing to do. It was a pleasure hearing from all of you. So I'd like to begin tonight with a quote from Sarbecker, Tracing the Path of Yoga. This is a text that we read for our thesis class and was fabulous. In fact, it inspired me to do the work that I did over this last semester. So there are different periods in yoga's history that are broken up so that it's easier to study different subjects and ideologies that kind of help us define what these different periods mean. So let's start with this quote, okay? During the medieval transformation of yoga, traditions of Laya Yoga, Kundalini, Hatha Yoga. Okay, hold on. Learning how to use this computer. Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, sorry about that. I'll start again. Traditions of Laya Yoga, Kundalini, Hatha Yoga developed sophisticated conceptions of inner spiritual architecture in which the physical body is informed by the subtle body, comprised of channels or nadis, and energetic wheels through which vitality, prana, flows. The subtle body may be viewed as the focus for latent spiritual forces of intense energy and heat, or Kundalini, and the manipulation of the prana and the vital fluids, binda, bijas, rajas, through its channels, seen to facilitate rapid spiritual as well as physical transformation. All right, so what does all this mean? It's quite a mouthful, right? All right. The focus of my thesis was to explore this inner spiritual architecture, this explanation of how the physical body is formed, how it manifests, how it functions. Through the Panchamaya kosha model is what I was looking through concerning raising Kundalini. I would like to give special thanks to Francesca Gold and her thesis on looking at the Panchamaya kosha model. It really helped inform the way that I put my paper together. So thank you, Francesca. All right. All right, here we go. In learning more about the history and relationship between the Panchamaya kosha model, prana, nadis, chakras, bandas, and Kundalini, we come to appreciate neat perspectives on the functioning of the human body. Cultivating a greater understanding of prana, nadi, and chakra places emphasis on the role of Mula Banda, Uddiyana Banda, Jalandhara Banda, and Mahabanda in directly influencing the state of one's inner spiritual architecture. Additionally, familiarization of the bandas through the Siva Samhita, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and Garanda Samhita reveals the techniques were serving multi-dimensional purposes. By considering the tradition of raising Kundalini from the Panchamaya kosha model, we can gain multiple points of reference for comparing the esoteric practice to the form, function, and flow of cerebrospinal fluid. My investigation of comparing this esoteric practice of raising Kundalini and cerebrospinal fluid found that the bandas, or these locks, the way in which we muscularly engage our body was congruent with the recorded sensations associated with Kundalini rising. Additionally, the benefits affiliated with the practice of raising Kundalini matched the health benefits gained from free-flowing cerebral spinal fluid. Finally, the recorded negative side effects affiliated with raising Kundalini paralleled the negative side effects of cerebral spinal fluid stasis, or cerebral spinal fluid not moving well in the body. My goal is not to define a spiritual practice. I'm not trying to tell you what Kundalini is in a physical form. That's not my goal here. That's not my intention. That is a spiritual practice. That is between you and your own spirit, in my humble opinion. Instead, it is to understand the tradition of raising Kundalini in its entirety and provide possible unique perspectives for diseases and disorders that affect the central and peripheral nervous system. Similar to our colleague Amanda Go, I believe that yoga's evolution in response to human need fosters inclusivity. All right, so maybe now I'll calm down a little bit. Okay. I started my research by familiarizing myself with these different locks, these different bandas, by comparing 3 different texts that they came from. The Panchamaya, by looking at, I started my research by better facilitating myself with the components of the Panchamaya kosha model, pranas, bandas, nadi, chakras, and with a brief overview. The Panchamaya kosha model is comprised of 2 physical and 3 subtle body layers. Each maintains a distinct purpose of equal importance and simultaneously influences one another. The multidimensional whole person model places equal importance on the physical and subtle bodies. The prana is what feeds these different koshas. So we have these 5 koshas in the body. You have your physical layer, then you have your pranic layer, which is your breath, okay? Then you have your mental layer, your emotional layer, and then your spiritual layer. What feeds all these different layers is known as bindu or prana. The way that this bindu and prana moves through the bodies is through a series of channels or nadis. It's kind of interesting, right? And these nadis are said not only to inform the physical layers of the body, but also outside of the body. These are both something that you could see and feel, but also something that is just not of human existence. So it's multiple layered. The 3 nadis that are the most important are the Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna nadi. When we're talking about a Kundalini experience, we're talking about the prana coming up through the center of the Sushumna nadi, up to the head, and then kind of basting the brain, if you will, to help bring more vitality and health benefits to you, as well as more of a spiritual awakening. There are certain places where the nadis form large clusters. In these places, we have chakras. And when we look at the chakras through the Panchamaya kosha model, it's really interesting because we can see that they not only have kind of this physical element to them, that's in more modern tradition, but also they are informed by how our breathing will affect them, how our mind will affect them, how our emotions will affect them, how our faith will affect them. And it's the same as in a reverse, right? They also can influence our mind, our body, our spirit, our breath. So pretty fascinating. Okay, so I'm looking at the different bandas in the body. The first one being the Mula Banda, and this is engagement of the lower body to help hug the base of your spine. Uddiyana Banda involves then taking the viscera, if you will, and bringing it up against the spine and maybe under the rib cage a little bit. Jalandhara Banda is dropping the chin down and holding it against the chest. And then we have Mahabandha, which is a combination of all 3 in one. All of these are said to help raise the Kundalini in the body. All right. So after looking at 3 different texts, the Siva Samhita, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and the Garanda Samhita, I looked at these 3 different texts and they all cover these 3 different bandas, right? And I did a cross analysis. Nothing like what John did with looking at cross analysis with his work. There was no math equation involved. Maybe in future work, I'll be able to do something like that. And then I looked at cerebral spinal fluid, and I wanted to learn more about the physical components of the cerebral spinal fluid, how our breath affects cerebral spinal fluid. Does it have an impact on how we think? Does it have an impact on how we feel? Does it have an impact on our spirituality? Then I went ahead and looked at how do these things mesh, and what does that show? So I'd like to go ahead and start with just a little bit on what is cerebral spinal fluid. Sometimes referred to as a nourishing liquor of the brain, cerebral spinal fluid is vital to the survival of an individual. Produced in cavities found in the center of the brain, the distilled liquid is from the cerebral blood. Just as the earth filters rising water from a seep spring, simple cuboidal epithelium surrounds the clusters of fenestrated capillaries in the filtration of the plasma. The result is an oozing ultrafiltrate plasma into the brain's ventricles. Centrally located, the life-sustaining aquifer is known as the choroid plexus. It produces 400 to 600 milliliters of cerebral spinal fluid a day. As a result, it completely renews 4 to 5 times within 24 hours of the average adult. So that's a lot of fluid that we're producing and then replacing. Pretty phenomenal. All right, so now we'd like to go ahead and look at Jalandhara banda. And some of the research that came up when exploring Jalandhara banda. It'd take a while to go ahead and go through all of the different ones. Okay, here we go. Jalandhara banda concerns itself with protecting the nectar, which it exudes of the 1,000-petaled lotus from digestive juices and stopping the sensation of the Ida and Pingala, contracting the throat muscles and lowering the chin to the chest, stimulates the pharyngeal nerve, causing intra-abdominal pressure to increase the stiffness of the lumbar spine. Additionally, Paul Hodges found, I'm so sorry. Here we go. Additionally, Paul Hodges found one can increase the intra-abdominal pressure by using tectonic stimulation of the pharyngeal nerve without contracting any activity of the abdominal and back extensor muscles. Through physical means, Jalandhara banda assists the yogi to sit up straight and aligns the spine for the cerebrospinal fluid to move up towards the head in a caudal direction through the Sushumna nadi. So just the activation itself is going to bring it up. Okay. Taking it a little bit further, if we read from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, having done Jalandhara banda by contracting the throat and the nectar does not fall into the gastric fire and the prana is not agitated. So I took that little piece from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and looked at what happens in the body when we go ahead and engage Jalandhara banda. There is a particular word in that text that talks about the ardas. And the ardas, the 16 ardas that come from the text, greatly mirror the 12 cranial nerves in the body. What has recently been shown through research is that we have sheaths around these 12 cranial nerves. That's not the new research. The new research is being able to see that the cerebral spinal fluid moves within these sheaths. That's what's new. They never saw this before. That's very exciting. And that came out just last year. So my question to that is, yes, these 12 cranial nerves, 2 of which actually come down through the throat. So could dropping the chin to the chest, in fact, close the ability for that nectar from the brain to drip down into the body? It's just pretty interesting. All right. As I was doing my research, I had a particular former student that developed encephalitis, unfortunately. And what I found interesting about her condition was that it mirrored a lot of the symptoms that she had mirrored a negative Kundalini awakening. Yeah. And so in talking to one another, we went ahead and put in place some techniques that, well, she decided on her own validity to go ahead and try some techniques that are known for helping balance out somebody having a negative Kundalini experience. She had the best doctors in New York City, really phenomenal. She was diagnosed by her roommate who was obsessed with encephalitis for some reason. I know, it's this weird thing. She got rushed to the hospital, and within 24 hours, she had life-saving surgery. They had to completely replace her blood. When she came back, she ended up having auras, migraines. She had trouble keeping thoughts straight in her head. She had weakness of her muscles. It was pretty difficult for her to deal with. And in talking to Taylor, I realized a lot of these things were similar to what had happened with Gopi Krishna, who writes about having a negative Kundalini awakening. So we went ahead and did some basic things together, like having her eat every 3 hours, having her use her breath to go ahead and help better control her symptoms. And she found that this made a profound difference in her ability to cope with what life had dealt her, and she's continued to make progress. The reason I did this research, again, was not to define Kundalini. That was not my purpose. Instead, I wanted to see if I could use the Panchamaya kosha model, and I say Panchamaya kosha model, to allow me to go ahead and look at the Kundalini experience and see if then I could draw parallels into modern day elements and perhaps see different insights. The paper is much better than my presentation, much, much better. And I really hope that if this is of interest to you at all, that you would take the time to read it. I apologize for my inability to speak well in front of crowds. And I appreciate your patience this evening so much. So thank you.